He was wiping the bakery counter when it happened. The morning rush had just settled, and the aroma of cinnamon rolls and fresh baguettes lingered in the air. Wearing his usual beige t-shirt and faded red apron, he sipped his coffee, and finally sat down to breathe. That's when a shadow loomed by the window. Then another, and another. 5 black SUVs, identical and intimidating, parked in front of his tiny bakery like a funeral procession. He blinked in confusion. No one ever pulled up here like that. Not in this neighborhood. Not for a place like his. Before he could move, the door swung open. A man in a sleek navy suit walked in, flanked by 2 others. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't even look around. The man placed a folded letter on the counter with 2 fingers, like he didn't want to touch anything more than necessary. "You need to vacate this space by the end of the week," he said coldly. "It's been acquired. Details are inside." The simple man stared at the paper in silence, the steam from his coffee curling past his face as he tried to process what he just heard. "You can't be serious," he muttered. "Corporate decision." The suited man shrugged. "The block is being redeveloped. Nothing personal." But it was personal. This was his life. This was his soul. He had built this bakery with his own hands, brick by brick, recipe by recipe, serving the same quiet neighborhood that had once laughed at his dream. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just looked at the note, then back at the man. And in that moment, something inside him didn't break. It solidified. Across the room, a regular customer stood frozen, coffee cup halfway to his lips. In the corner, an old man, silent, always alone, watched everything unfold. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said enough. The suited man turned to leave, but not before glancing around with barely disguised contempt. "Honestly," he muttered, to no one in particular, "I don't know how you've kept this place running this long." And then they were gone. The bell above the door jingled like a cruel afterthought. He sat back down, clutching the letter. No one knew what was coming. Not the man in the suit, not the drivers outside, not the silent old man in the corner, but something was about to happen. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about that quiet little bakery and the humble man who ran it. For most people, he was just the bakery guy, a man in a beige t-shirt, always behind the counter, always smiling softly but never saying much. He didn't advertise his story. He didn't decorate the shop with framed achievement, and no one really asked. But the truth was, Gabriel Harris had done more for that neighborhood than anyone knew. Long before the bakery had ovens and shelves, long before the counters were polished, Gabriel had been living in his car. Years ago, after walking away from a corporate life that drained him of purpose, he found himself with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a recipe book his mother left behind. That book became his compass. But the turning point, the part no one ever saw, was what he did with his first real earnings. Instead of expanding his business or buying fancy equipment, Gabriel began leaving fresh bread in paper bags on doorsteps, anonymously. Elderly neighbors, single mothers, struggling workers. No names, no fanfare, just a note inside. "For the days that feel too heavy, you are not forgotten." And then came Thomas. Thomas was a retired factory worker who had once been known for his booming laugh, until a stroke left him unable to speak and barely mobile. Most people in the neighborhood forgot he existed, except Gabriel. Every morning at 6:45 a.m., before opening the shop, Gabriel would walk 2 blocks carrying a warm croissant and a small cup of coffee, just the way Thomas liked it. No words, just presence. One day Thomas's daughter caught him in the act. She burst into tears, not because of the food, but because it had been years since anyone had shown her father that kind of dignity. From that moment, Gabriel's quiet acts of kindness rippled far beyond what he realized. People began to take notice, not of him, but of the feeling he left behind. Strangers would walk into the bakery and say, "I don't know why, but this place feels like home." And that's how Gabriel wanted it. He had no interest in status, no desire to impress. What fulfilled him was watching someone take that first bite of warm bread and close their eyes, like they were remembering something good, something pure. What no one knew was that Gabriel Harris was the founder of the Harbor Foundation, a nonprofit that funded community kitchens and mobile food trucks for underserved areas. He created it under a different name so no one would associate it with his bakery. He didn't want people to buy from him out of pity or praise. He wanted them to come because they felt seen. The Harbor Foundation had already helped launch 5 mobile food units across the state, each one named after a woman who once stood in soup kitchen lines with children at her side. Gabriel never told those women. He just honored them quietly. In the far corner of his bakery above the spice rack, there was a shelf with small clay birds, each representing someone whose life had been changed by one of the foundation's programs. To most, they were just decoration, but to Gabriel, they were everything. He had no LinkedIn profile, no media coverage, no influencer partnerships, but what he built was real. And soon, thanks to the arrogance of 5 SUVs and a folded eviction notice, the world was about to find out. Gabriel Harris wasn't wealthy by appearance. His shoes were worn at the heel, his hands were calloused, and his t-shirts always bore faint stains from flour or raspberry jam. Yet if anyone ever took the time to really look, they'd see a man rich in ways most people never dared to measure. Each morning, after delivering to Thomas, Gabriel would unlock the bakery, kneel behind the counter, and whisper a single sentence. Under his breath, "Let today be about more than bread." It wasn't a prayer, it was a reminder. Despite never marketing himself, word of Gabriel's warmth reached far beyond the town. There were stories, some whispered, some confirmed. A young man who used to sleep behind the bakery now working as a chef in New Orleans. A single mother who once paid for bread, with a hand-drawn card now managing a grocery store 2 towns over. A high school dropout who'd wandered in looking for a job and left 2 years later with a full scholarship Gabriel helped him apply for. Secretly, he never needed recognition. When asked about those stories, he'd simply smile and say, "People rise when someone believes they can." But there was one belief Gabriel held above all. Never underestimate someone just because they carry their life quietly. It's why he connected so deeply with Thomas. Not because the man was silent, but because he had once been loud, full of life, and now lived in the shadow of his past voice. Gabriel understood that pain. He too had been dismissed, judged, written off. Years ago, he'd walked into a bank to pitch his idea for a mobile kitchen that fed people without asking for their story first. The branch manager had laughed. "You're a baker, not a philanthropist," he'd said. "Try a GoFundMe." Gabriel left without saying a word. The next day, he sold his car and used the money to build a prototype cart on his own. Within 6 months, it was serving 300 meals a week. No paperwork, no questions, no shame. The Harbor Foundation was born not out of ambition, but out of defiance. A silent rebellion against a world that measured worth in bank accounts and resumes. Gabriel had no board of directors, just handwritten thank you notes, photos of people reunited around folding tables, and a shoebox filled with cash donations. From anonymous envelopes, every dollar was accounted for. Every life mattered. And still, every morning he returned to the same stool by the front window, apron tied tight, waiting to serve croissants and kindness. But not everyone appreciated humility. A luxury development company had been buying property near his street. They wanted to turn the neighborhood into a series of modern condos with yoga studios and valet parking. One by one, small businesses had been pushed out, bought or bullied. Gabriel was one of the last to remain. That's when the anonymous letters started. First, it was a courtesy notice about sidewalk cleanliness, then a noise complaint about music from the kitchen. Next came the visits, polished men in tailored suits, asking if he'd consider selling while the market's hot. Gabriel declined every time, politely but firmly, and so the pressure escalated. One morning, as he folded aprons in the back, a new letter slid under the door. This one wasn't typed, it was handwritten, the penmanship elegant but cold. "You're not wanted here. Sell or be removed." He didn't show it to anyone. He simply placed it in the same box where he kept every thank you note, every blessing, every hand-drawn card. Because even in that threat, he found clarity. They had mistaken him for a man who'd be intimidated, a man who would back down when cornered, a man defined by the softness of his smile rather than the strength of his convictions. They didn't know that this simple man had built something sacred, and they had no idea that the next day, 5 black SUVs would block the entire front of his bakery, not to threaten, but to witness, because Gabriel Harris wasn't alone. The morning began like any other. Gabriel wiped down the front counter, lined up trays of warm pastries, and unlocked the door at precisely 7:01 a.m. The early light spilled through the windows, casting a golden hue across the shelves. He adjusted his red apron and glanced out the glass, expecting the usual: a jogger waving, the mailman nodding, Thomas already waiting on the bench. But the street was eerily quiet until the first SUV appeared. It turned the corner silently, its matte black frame gleaming under the rising sun. Then came a second, a third. By the time the fourth and fifth pulled up in formation, tires kissing the curb in near-perfect synchronization, Gabriel wasn't the only one staring. Across the street, the coffee shop barista paused mid-pour. A dog stopped barking mid-growl. People emerged from shops, phones already rising to capture whatever was about to happen. The doors opened simultaneously. From the first vehicle stepped a sharply dressed woman with platinum gray hair tied in a sleek knot. She wore a navy suit with no logos, no jewelry, no distractions. Her presence alone commanded silence. Behind her, 4 other individuals emerged, each one in coordinated black, and began surveying the sidewalk like agents on assignment. But none of them spoke. Instead, they stepped aside, and from the back seat of the lead SUV, an older man was gently helped out. He wore a simple blue sweater and tan slacks, a soft cap resting on thinning hair. Thomas, the same Thomas who had sat quietly on Gabriel's bench every morning, whose eyes rarely met anyone's, whose gait had slowed over the years. Only this time, he wasn't holding a coffee. He was holding a microphone. A small podium was placed in front of the bakery. Cameras unfolded. A branded backdrop rolled out with chilling precision. The Whitaker Foundation. The crowd murmured, "Whitaker as in Olivia Whitaker, the billionaire philanthropist, the investment mogul, the woman whose name graced hospitals, libraries, and global conferences." And then she arrived. A final SUV pulled in, softer and sleeker than the rest. The door opened slowly, and Olivia Whitaker stepped out. No red carpet, no sunglasses, no entourage. She wore a long cream coat over a beige dress, her expression unreadable, until her eyes found Gabriel through the bakery window. She smiled, not the rehearsed smile of a public figure, but the kind that says, "I've been waiting for this." Gabriel's breath caught. The last time he'd seen her, it had been years ago, in a far more private setting. They'd met during a benefit event. She, the keynote speaker, he, the anonymous donor behind a pop-up food bank that had served 10,000 families. They'd exchanged no last names, only ideas. He hadn't expected to see her again, until now. Thomas stepped to the mic. "My name is Thomas," he began, voice stronger than anyone had ever heard it, "and I've spent the last 6 months sitting on this bench outside Gabriel Harris's bakery. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I chose to be there. Because I saw something the rest of the world missed." Gasps rippled through the audience. "That man you walk past every day? The one with flour on his apron and kindness in his eyes? He doesn't just serve bread. He serves humanity." He paused, letting the silence speak. "And starting today, the Whitaker Foundation is proud to announce a $10 million partnership with the Harbor Network, a foundation created by Mr. Harris to expand community nourishment programs across the nation." The crowd exploded. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. Gabriel just stood behind the glass, stunned, one flour-dusted hand still gripping the edge of the counter. Then Olivia approached. She entered the bakery like it was a cathedral, and when she reached him, she didn't shake his hand. She embraced him. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He blinked. "You remembered?" She pulled back, eyes glistening. "How could I forget the simple man who said, 'The world doesn't need more heroes, it needs more helpers'?" The next few hours blurred into something almost dreamlike. Media vans lined the street. Interviews were requested, declined, and redirected. Customers poured into the bakery, not for croissants, but for handshakes. Strangers asked for selfies. A boy gave Gabriel a letter that simply read, "Thank you for being kind to someone who looked invisible." Meanwhile, Olivia stood beside him, not in the spotlight, but just close enough for everyone to understand. She was there for him. But the most surprising part? Gabriel never looked smug, never gloated. He didn't rush to correct the people who had ignored or judged him. When asked how it felt to be revealed as the man behind Harbor Network, an initiative that had quietly fed over 100,000 people across the country, he simply shrugged and said, "It was never about being noticed. It was about people not going hungry." Reporters tried to dig deeper. Some asked if he and Olivia were together, most already speculating online. She smiled but offered no comment. Instead, Thomas returned to the mic for one final statement. "Every morning, Gabriel handed me a coffee and a sandwich with a smile. Never once asked for anything in return. Some days it was the only human interaction I had, and he did that not knowing who I was, not knowing I'd spent 30 years managing investments for billionaires. He just saw me as someone who deserved dignity." He gestured toward Gabriel. "Now maybe the rest of you can start seeing people that way too." The crowd fell into a hush. In the back, a few familiar faces from the neighborhood bakery days stood awkwardly. One of them, the man who once complained Gabriel was too generous with the homeless, tried to slip away quietly. Gabriel noticed and waved at him. No bitterness, no lecture, just a wave, and that was perhaps the most humbling moment of all. The sun began to set and the crowd thinned. Gabriel locked up the bakery and stood beside Olivia on the sidewalk. The 5 SUVs had already pulled away. The spotlight was fading, but something permanent had changed, not just in how people saw him, but in how they might see others from now on. And if you've made it this far in the story, maybe you're feeling something too. A shift, a reminder, a question. Who do we overlook every day? Who might be carrying greatness in silence? Before you go, if this story moved you even a little, if it made you stop and reflect, consider joining our community of story lovers. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale that teaches, surprises, and inspires. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight. By the next morning, everything had changed. Not in the dramatic, movie scene way, with explosions or public apologies, but in the quiet, unsettling way that creeps up on those who thought they were safe behind their masks of pride. The men who had blocked Gabriel's bakery returned, but this time, they came with their heads lowered. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Richard Harmon, the same one who had shouted, "You're feeding that bum again?" just days earlier, stood outside the bakery holding a small plain paper bag. Inside was a cinnamon roll, the same one Gabriel used to give Thomas. "I didn't know," Richard said softly. "I judged. I mocked. I thought I was better." Gabriel didn't say a word. He just unlocked the door, flipped the sign to open, and held it there. No grudge, no speech, just grace. Meanwhile, online buzz continued to spread. Like wildfire, Olivia's identity had finally caught up to the headlines. Commentators on financial blogs began connecting the dots. The Olivia Whittaker had been spotted not in Paris or New York, but standing silently beside a man in a flour-stained apron. The internet exploded, but Gabriel still showed up at the bakery. At 4:30 a.m., still prepared coffee. Still greeted each customer with a quiet, "Good morning." That's what shook people the most. Not the Bugatti, not the billion-dollar connection, but the consistency of kindness. Even those who once looked through him now couldn't meet his eyes without feeling the weight of their own prejudice. Some tried to overcompensate, bringing gifts, asking to collaborate or invest. Gabriel politely declined every offer. "I'm not a project," he would say with a soft chuckle. "I'm a baker." Even the press eventually moved on. But the lesson? It lingered. The old man, Thomas, had returned to his routine too, though now he sat inside the bakery rather than outside it, often with Gabriel's golden retriever curled up beside him. The chairs that were once empty were now always filled, but not because the place had become trendy, because it had become meaningful, a space where no one asked what you did for a living before offering you a seat. But the true justice? It was still coming. And when it arrived, it wouldn't come from Gabriel. It would come from someone the world had really underestimated. The bakery's door chimed again. This time it wasn't a neighbor or a regular. It was Mr. Bennett, CEO of Whittaker Holdings and Olivia's longtime business partner. He was never seen without a tailored navy suit and a phone glued to his ear. But today he looked different. Still sharp, still commanding, but quieter, more aware. He extended his hand toward Gabriel. "We've never met properly," he said, his voice measured. "But I owe you an apology." Gabriel shook his hand, nodding. "For what?" "For not seeing you sooner," Bennett replied. "Everyone thought you were just the quiet husband. But now I see the truth." Gabriel didn't respond with pride. He didn't need to. His humility had already rewritten every false narrative. But justice wasn't just about apologies. Later that week, 5 of the men who had mocked Gabriel, including Richard, received anonymous invitations, elegant black envelopes, no return address, just the words, "Come hungry, come honest." When they arrived, they found themselves not in a boardroom, but in a community center. Children in wheelchairs and walkers zoomed through obstacle courses. Teens with sensory sensitivities were painting on digital tablets adapted just for them. At the center of it all stood Olivia, but she wasn't giving a speech. She was helping a young boy adjust his hearing device, while Gabriel showed another how to knead dough on a low countertop. The men froze. This wasn't just charity. This was investment, real human investment. Then a woman approached them. Her name was Samantha, Gabriel's sister. She had organized the event. "We don't want donations," she said calmly. "We want you to experience what dignity feels like, especially when it's offered to those society overlooks." Each of them was assigned to assist a child for the day, and what they experienced wasn't pity. It was perspective. As the sun set, one of the men, tears in his eyes, turned to Gabriel and whispered, "You never once tried to prove us wrong, and yet we were." Gabriel just smiled. The next morning, a bronze plaque was quietly mounted outside. "The bakery. Don't judge by looks. You might be missing the richest heart in the room." And that, more than any article, luxury car, or viral video, was what truly changed the city. Because one humble man didn't fight to be seen. He simply kept being worth seeing. Some stories end with applause, others with confessions. But Gabriel's story? It ended with understanding. In a world obsessed with appearances, labels, suits, brands, and bank accounts, he was a quiet storm that changed hearts without shouting. A simple man underestimated at first glance, who never needed to prove his worth. He simply lived it, and in doing so, forced everyone around him to reflect on the measure of true value. The bakery became more than a place for pastries. It became a landmark for kindness, for second chances, for stories that teach. People came not just for bread, but for perspective. Tourists asked to see the spot where the SUVs had lined up. Locals whispered about the man who never raised his voice, even when he was mocked. Children left drawings on the window with messages like, "I want to be like him." And the quiet old man who once sat alone by the trash bin? He now taught a weekend class at the bakery, showing kids how to bake cinnamon rolls and how to recognize good people when you meet them. Every visitor who stepped inside saw the plaque on the wall. "Don't judge by looks. True worth lives." In silence, and behind the counter, Gabriel would nod gently whenever someone read it out loud for the first time. So now the question is yours. Have you ever judged someone by the way they looked? Or worse, have you ever been the one misjudged? If this story moved you, let it change something inside you. Let it shape how you look at strangers, how you speak to those who can't give you anything in return. Because maybe, just maybe, the next simple man you overlook is the one who could change your life forever. If you believe in empathy, in second chances, and in stories that matter, subscribe now. Join us for more emotional storytelling, because the next tale might just be yours.